Marta?
We are now live. Shall we begin?
Escuta,
Começamos?
nós temos alguém aí, Marta?
Estão aqui 16 pessoas.
Olha, já é bom. Acho que nós já podemos arrancar. 16 já não é mal, olha. As pessoas vão entrar.
Bem-vindos. Então eu vou começar. Vou interromper o compartilhamento. Podes fazer a tua apresentação.
Ok.
Bom.
Quando puder, você dá ok.
Ok. Podes começar.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Branco.
Thanks for being here. I am delighted to welcome you all to the international seminar Hate Speech on Social Media. Today's event is organized by LabCom Research Center at the University of Beira Interior in Portugal and Odecom Research Center at the Pontifical Catholic University in Ecuador. Hate speech is a complex issue that manifests itself in different social contexts for many decades. However, with the fast development of digital technologies, particularly social media platforms, understanding hate speech has become even more challenging. Because of that, we have published a book that explores the nature of hate speech on social media. We prioritize a diversity of approaches from the global north and the global south. It included contributions from 21 authors representing 11 countries. Our book is open access and the link is available in the description of this broadcast. You can download and share it for free. To talk about this important topic, we have two panels for this afternoon. I would like to invite Professor Anabela Gradim at the University of Beira Interior, my university in Portugal, who will moderate the first panel. Thanks, Professor Anabela, for accepting our invitations. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Branco, for this presentation. Good afternoon and welcome to our international seminar, Hate Speech on Social Media. We have, as Branco said, 4 invitees for this panel, this debate, Professors Lida, Muluken, Mykola, and Özlem, and they are going to share their thoughts on hate speech and social media in this seminar. So I'll start by presenting our first conferences. Professor Lida Tsene from Open University on Cyprus. Professor Lida holds a degree in communication, media, and culture, and a PhD on social media and social responsibility. She teaches communication since 2010 and has worked in the field for more than a decade. Professor Lida is head of PR, art, and educational programs of Comic-Con in Athens, founder of the Athens Comics Library, managing co-director of the Digital Comics Museum, organizer and curator of several events, exhibitions, conferences, and workshops. Currently, she's a teaching associate at the Master in Communication and New Journalism of Open University of Cyprus. So welcome, Professor Lida. I would like to ask you if you could give us an outline of hate speech in your country. What are the most prevalent narratives? What platforms are most used? And which targets are aimed at the most?
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. It's a great honor to be among distinguished colleagues from all around the world and discuss about this very important and challenging phenomenon. And of course, as the rise of hate speech is growing globally, Greece couldn't be an exception. And unfortunately, even children face online hate speech, as a recent survey revealed. And COVID and refugee crisis the past years revealed a big amount of racist and xenophobic speech online, towards refugees, migrants, and underrepresented groups. Moreover, we witness a lot of sexism, hate speech towards females and also female-identified people, non-binary people, and transgender people. And I'm in a very in a not very pleasant position to say that our country seems to has a very big percentage of hate speech, while there's no a very concrete policy around it, or even a very concrete strategy in fighting hate speech. Platforms that we witness most of these hate speech issues is Facebook, but also there is a rise in closed messaging apps such as WhatsApp and Viber, and that was something that grew a lot during COVID. It seems that the uncertainty and this turbulent environment of fear that was developed during the pandemic gave the opportunity to certain groups to prevail into closed messaging narratives against, I would say again, mostly female and also transgender people. And lately, as in Greece, at the moment, we are before elections for a new government. There is also a big trend around politics, and the past month there is a huge debate and lots of hate speech phenomena coming mostly from alt-right political parties or representatives, spreading again fear around the web.
Thank you, Professor Lida. I will now present our next invitee, which is Professor Muluken, and I will make him the same question. So Professor Gencel is Assistant Professor of Media and Communication at Debre Markos University. He's a radio journalist and media and communication trainer. He was the founder of Mango magazine, a Dila University academic publication, served as head of the Department of Journalism and Communication, and Director of Public and International Affairs Relations at Dila University. His PhD versed on social media hate in Ethiopia. Professor Gencel authored an academic book in 2018 entitled Journalism and Communication, and in the book we are launching here, with another colleague, he authored the chapter Ethiopian Socio-Political Contexts for Hate Speech. So which has a lot to do with the question I'm giving you now, which is what's the outline of hate speech in your country? What are the most prevalent narratives and platforms, and also who is getting more targeted in hate speech in Ethiopia?
Thank you very much for having me here and being part of that book, which is interesting, and I'm excited to be part of this international authors team. And I think I am the only one from Africa, maybe, and I'm happy to see Ethiopia chapter in that book. Thank you, and I would like to say Happy Mother's Day to many of the participants are women, and I'm also glad to see. I think you are hearing me, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Ethiopians do not have last names culture, so my name is Muluken, not Chakol. As stated well in the book, so I'm Muluken from Ethiopia, Debre Markos University. Hate speech in Ethiopia is emanated basically from our political culture. I think Ethiopia is one of a country who has a long history and state history, but in the mid of the 20s, the kingdom overthrown by the socialist government, and the socialist government were also overthrown by the ethnic federalist government system. This ethnic politics is the main source of the hate speech that expand in the social media and sometimes in the mainstream media too. Basically, the political structure, the economic structure, and other socio-cultural issues in Ethiopia oriented by contest in all activities that Ethiopians are working in. So the most targeted groups are ethnic groups. Basically, in my study, I identified the Oromo ethnic group is the most targeted one. It could be by any. I can't identify the targeters, but the targeted are easy to identify, and the other ethnic groups also victims for social media hate speech. So the political contest, which is identity-based, expanded to the online sphere. So Facebook is the dominant social media in Ethiopia, and there are also some identity-based mainstream media, and their online version is also a platform where many hate attacks the other out groups. So there is little religious-based hate speech, and there is also some gender-based hate speech, but they are insignificant in terms of number. But basically, the identity-based political hate speech suffocated the Ethiopian social media. Having this hate speech ranges from incitement of violence to incitement of genocide, and that hate speech, some of the hate speech executed online, for example, the Amara ethnic groups targeted in some other regions, whereas the Tigrayans, as you I think recently remember, the northern Ethiopia was in war, and that war also incorporated many of the youth, and engages many of the civilians, not only the military groups. Many of the civilians were also part of the war because of such kinds of hate speech. Identities each other went to conflict without any reason. Hate is rampant. So there is also act of violence, not only remain in the level of hate or speech. The speech is executed in some parts of the country into genocide acts. So until the political sphere continues with such identity-based rhetoric or narrations, I think the social media hate speech in Ethiopia remains the key issues for the nation. In 2020, the government passed a bill that tried to curb social media hate speech, but the government used the bill to target some of the critical voices against the government. But the civilians are still vulnerable for not only for the hate speech, but also for executions. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Muluken, for your intervention. I hope we have time in the end so I can make you some questions, because you said many surprising and serious things. And now I'm going to present Professor Mykola. Professor Mykola Makhortykh is an Alfred Landecker Lecturer at the Institute of Communication and Media Studies at the University of Bern in Switzerland. In his research, Professor Mykola focuses on politics and history-centered information behavior in online environments and how it is affected by the information retrieval systems such as search engines and recommender systems. He recently published in journals such as Telecommunications, Policy, Memory Studies, New Media and Society, and Journal of Information Science. In the chapter of the book we're presenting here now, which co-signed with Professor Juan Manuel González Aguilar, Professor Mykola authored a chapter entitled Internet Memes and Hate Speech on Telegram in relation to Russia's war in Ukraine. So, Professor Mykola, my question is exactly the same I made to your colleagues. If you could give us an outline of hate speech in your country. By your country, I believe we're not meaning Switzerland, where you teach, but Russia, which was the subject of your chapter in our book. So welcome, Professor Mykola, and what do you have to say about hate speech in Russia and their narratives and targets?
Thank you so much for the introduction, Anabela, and also for Branco for the excellent book. It's really such a great pleasure to be part of it, as well as speak on this event with the excellent co-authors who also contributed to this great volume. So, as Anabela said, indeed, in our chapter, together with my great colleague, Juan, we are specifically looking at the hate speech in Ukraine. And I would say that my country is actually Ukraine, not Russia. But unfortunately, right now, it's really very difficult to talk about the hate speech in Ukraine without talking about hate speech in Russia, because right now, these are quite interclosed subjects. The reason why they are so interclosed is unfortunately something that we're all very well aware about. It's the Russian invasion in Ukraine, which started in 2022. And which unfortunately was also accompanied by the very massive rise of the hate speech, both in the Ukrainian but also in the Russian context. I would also say that it's actually one of the reasons why both me and Juan believe that it's so important to look at the hate speech in the context of the Ukraine and Russia, because similarly to what Muluken, the previous speaker, was talking about, the hate speech is particularly concerning at the time of war and at the time of conflict, because we already have very heated attitudes towards between people, and we know that hate speech might actually lead to the further dehumanization of the opponents and also incite the further violence. And unfortunately, in some cases, this incitement of violence might actually lead to the genocide and to the mass atrocities, which is something that's happening both in Ukraine and unfortunately in other parts of the world. We also know that social media, as this great book actually shows, really play an increasingly important role in the context of spreading and also promoting hate speech. What we actually also are seeing in the case of Ukraine is that social media definitely provides and uses new possibilities which are provided by the social media in terms of the spreading the hate speech. Because if we're thinking about the main, I would say, capacity that social media provides, is essentially the reach that is provided to the hate speech, and also the speed of spread of the hateful messages, which might, for instance, incite the violence or call actually to killing or actually humiliating certain groups of people. We also know that, for instance, quite a number of social media platforms actually put, I would say, substantial effort into trying to counter the use of these platforms for spreading hate speech, but also knowing, unfortunately, both from, I would say, quite common anecdotal observations, but also in-depth study, that it's not always successful. And actually, one of the reasons why it's not necessarily successful is that because hate speech actually evolves quite a lot in the digital environments, and it is also what we're observing in the case of Ukraine. It's also why, for instance, in our chapter with Juan, we are focusing on actually the use of the internet memes to disseminate and spread the hate speech. Why internet memes are actually quite effective in this sense? We know that internet memes are generally funny pieces of the internet content, that pieces that people actually like to view, that people actually like to spread, and it actually makes them quite effective way of spreading hate speech. First of all, because they're engaging, so it's actually easier to reach people using the memes when you actually want to spread the hateful message. And second, because it's actually a bit more nuanced than simply writing, let's say, on the Facebook or on Twitter, let's go and murder some Ukrainians. It's probably not necessarily something that platform would ignore. But if you're actually making a funny picture with, for instance, Ukrainians shown as pigs with insects and making some joke on it, that actually doesn't necessarily automatically detected by the platform as a hate speech. And some people might actually tell, okay, it's just a joke, it's not serious. It's actually acceptable type of the content. And what we're actually arguing with Juan is that it's really something that makes the spread of hate speech on the social media is very dangerous and very problematic, because hate speech actually evolves, it actually takes new forms, and it actually takes new messages and uses these new formats to actually spread those messages. And for instance, in the case of Ukraine, when we think about who actually targeted by the hate speech, then naturally it is both Ukrainians and Russians. And in our chapter, we specifically looked at how Russian extreme groups use internet memes to primarily target Ukrainians, who are the primary victims of the war. And what we actually found is that there are definitely different ways the internet memes can be used to target specific groups, but also individuals. We observed, for instance, that some internet memes are indeed targeting the majority of Ukrainians, or let's say the majority of Ukrainian soldiers, so they're having this quite broad focus. And usually when you're doing this with the memes and you're indeed using memes to dehumanize those people, usually the common narrative, as I said, is really presenting Ukrainians as animals. And when you're presenting someone as an animal, that is generally not as problematic to actually justify the killing someone, because, you know, it's just an animal, it's not a human. It's not as problematic to kill a pig. It's much more problematic to kill a human. But we also observed that in some cases, internet memes are also having very, I would say, narrow and very specific target, and they might actually be used to actually target specific individuals. And in our chapter, for instance, we looked at how internet memes can be targeted, can be used to target some people from Russia, such as oppositionary journalists or people who are actually protesting against the war. And then internet memes might actually facilitate also dehumanization of those people, but also, for instance, the justification of symbolic, but also sometimes physical violence about them. And in this case, it's usually done through drawing parallels between those individuals and, let's say, very stigmatized groups, such as certain gender groups, such as LGBTQ plus groups, or, for instance, using some historical references by telling, okay, these individuals are actually related to the historical Nazi from the Second World War era, so you can actually justify violence against them. So what it really shows, I think, is that we really have a lot of challenges when we think about the social media and the hate speech and the relationship between those two. And these challenges are especially pronounced at the time of conflict, and especially in the context of the confrontations between the states, because then we see both how the hate speech actually amplifies substantially by the social media, but also how it actually takes new formats and new forms that make it much more difficult to stop it and also to detect it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mykola, for your presentation. Now our final conference is from Professor Özlem Alikılıç. Can you repeat it, please?
Alikılıç.
Alikılıç, okay. Thank you, Professor Özlem Alikılıç. I'll use the first name, it seems easier, so I won't make so many mistakes.
You can call me Özlem, Oz, whatever.
Very well. So, Professor Özlem, welcome. I'm going to make a brief presentation. Professor Özlem teaches at Yaşar University's Faculty of Communication since 2007. She has taught various courses as a visiting professor at universities in the Netherlands, Belgium, Bulgaria, Hungary, and Portugal, and has served as a country coordinator and educator in European Union projects. She is the author of solo books such as Mediation Communication and Public Relations 2.0, New Techniques, New Stakeholders in Social Media, as well as a collective author of books on strategic communication, corporate social responsibility, and also marketing. Professor Özlem has published articles that are indexed in Social Sciences Citation Index of Web of Science in Scopus, and also on emerging sources of Web of Science too. She provides corporate training to institutions and organizations in her areas of expertise. Her work in our book, the book we are launching here, Hate Speech on Social Media, is called Syrian Refugees in the Shade of the Anti-Syrian Discourse, Exploring Discriminatory Discursive Strategies on Twitter. So Twitter and Syrian refugees. Professor Özlem, I'm making you the same questions I did to your colleagues. If you could give us an outline of hate speech in your country, what are the most prevalent narratives, platforms, and also who is targeted the most?
Thank you, Professor Anabela. It's been a pleasure for me to be here around you. The spread of hate speech through insults, distortion, hostility, or symbolization in traditional and social media content against millions of refugees in Turkey is further deepening prejudice and creating social unrest among communities. I think there are two fundamental elements that create hate speech here. First is the fear that one's comfort zone will be disrupted. And the second one is a feeling of power, the discourse one brings about by demonstrating one's power over the other in a space shared with the others. And there is an intense expression of hate toward refugees in our country. The other for us today are the refugees and foreigners. The concern here is unwillingness to recognize and accept the other, and the ambiguity that if the other should be recognized, given the fear that he or she might take away what is mine if emerged as the majority. That root cause of this problem is a lack of communication, because the individual labels people as the other and begins generating fear when they don't know the person they are communicating with. In reality, what do we have in Turkey? Although our Article 10 of the Turkish Constitution lists the basis of discrimination, and these are riddled with shortcomings and are quite different than those defined in international conventions. For instance, Article 10 doesn't include such fundamental concepts as ethnic background, gender identity, and sexual orientation, all kinds of faith or lack thereof. Hate speech in Turkey therefore targets these groups intensively. The current legislation on hate speech, moreover, is not implemented to prevent hate speech. And another important problem pertains to the fact that hate speech and hate crimes have not been prescribed under a single title. For instance, our Article 122 of the Turkish Penal Code regulates hate and discrimination as an offense, while Article 125 proscribes insult. In addition, Article 115 prohibits prevention of the exercise of freedom of belief, thought, and conviction, while Article 153 regulates the offense of damaging places of worship and cemeteries, and Article 216 proscribes inciting the public to hatred, hostility, and degrading. So not all the conditions that should have been listed among the bases of discrimination have been listed under these types of offense. Therefore, all these articles embody insufficient provisions. However, I must also express that although legal measures are being taken regarding hate crimes, it should be noted that the penalties for these crimes are mostly limited to government criticisms and crimes developed against refugees. It is possible to say that the government remains silent and inactive in the punishment of hate crimes committed targeting vulnerable groups, such as especially LGBT groups, women's groups, young children, and different ethnic groups. While the Turkish nationalist and Sunni Islamic conservative government works positively on Sunni Muslim and Arab brothers through religious-based discourse and implementation of rules, they do not work as positively, for instance, on LGBT groups and other secondary groups they call secondary groups, such as women, secularist, or Alevist, which is the other sect in Islam in Turkey, and ethnic groups who are others than Turks, as they all are seen as secondary citizens. In other words, in Turkey, ethnic discrimination, racism, and gender-based or sexual orientation-based discrimination are not regarded as offenses because hate crimes are defined in quite a narrow way in Turkey. According to many monitoring reports by NGOs show that hate speech and hate crimes have become a part of everyday life in Turkey. One of the reasons why hate speech and subsequent hate crimes have become prevalent in the country is the common utilization of hate speech by politicians and bureaucrats. For instance, let me give you some examples from our real life. The head of the Directorate of Religious Affairs, he claimed and addressed on the very first day of Ramadan in 2020 that all evil and epidemic disease stem from homosexuality. And adding that adultery was one of the greatest harams in Islam. So his statement supported by our president and resulted in an escalation of serious hate speech against the LGBT plus in both the media and social media platforms. Therefore, such discourse inflicts pecuniary and non-pecuniary damages on certain groups by marginalizing them while threatening all the members of these groups. And the absence of an extensive legislation on hate crimes set the stage for the systematic perpetuation of such crimes, I think. And For instance, the recent hike in the number of attacks against many groups, particularly refugees, Syrian refugees, is a product of such a climate of impunity as well. But from the other side, there are also some national developments in here. In March 2021, the Turkish government announced the Human Rights Action Plan, one goal of which is to address hate crime. It was actually a good plan because it includes a commitment to criminalize hate crime separately and to take all the measures necessary to effectively fight these criminal offenses. The action plan specifically mentions hate crimes based on language, religion, race, color, sex, political views, philosophical beliefs, sect, or similar grounds, and acknowledges the impact of hate crime in targeting human dignity and undermining the peaceful coexistence of different groups. And they added constant monitoring into that plan because the monitoring, what I'm trying to say, it's both national and international monitoring. And they included the preparation of periodical reports on instances constituting discrimination or hate speech and crime. Moreover, the plan requires, of course, continuous review of the Criminal Law Science Commission and also sets out the psychosocial and legal support to be offered to the victims of discrimination and hate crimes. So they also claim that they are going to establish a monitoring board to monitor the action plan's implementation. The board is chaired by the president of our republic and consists of relevant ministers. And they admit that every 6 months they are coming and to take their agenda again and to fix if any matters wrong. So for now, I think that was all that I can tell you about the conditions in my country. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Özlem. I want to thank you, the four of you, for these excellent presentations. Each time I heard one of you speak, I was getting sadder and sadder because, in fact, the reality you portrayed here is very serious. It's a big problem, and none of you, for instance, Özlem spoke about the limitations of the law dealing with these cases. None of you can see a way out of this big problem in which we are all engaged. Hate speech produces real consequences and is a very serious thing. I also noticed that the targets, all of you mentioned targets, and they don't vary very much. We have a difference when we have war or non-war, as in the case of Turkey and Cyprus and Greece, and in Ethiopia and Ukraine we have a war, so targets differ, but they are mostly women, ethnic groups, refugees, migrants, and other underrepresented groups like minorities and LGBTQ+. And consequences of hate speech might range from discrimination to genocide incitement. And I cannot imagine anything worse than genocide incitement. So having a look at this, the commonality of the targets we may find in your four speeches, do you have an idea of who are the perpetrators of hate speech in your countries? There's a figure that's always absent in these targets you mentioned. Are there studies? Do you have an idea who are the perpetrators of this hate speech? So Maybe we could start by Özlem and go up in our list. So, Hema, are you hearing me? No? And the others, Branco, are you hearing me?
Yes, Anabela.
Okay, so Özlem seems to have lost sound. So she's signaling she can't hear me. So I'll go to Mykola and ask him the same question. Mykola, do you have an idea who are the perpetrators of this hate speech in your context?
Yeah, sure, Anabela. Thank you for the great question. I totally agree. It's one of the key questions because it's really very hard to counter the hate speech without knowing who the perpetrators, who actually the actors who are spreading the hate speech. I think what is true for Ukraine, but also for quite some other contexts, is that very often we do not know, unfortunately. And it's something that is definitely amplified by the social media, as well as the possibility to stay anonymous, to actually do not necessarily reveal your identity, or simply, for instance, to create fake accounts and then use them to spread the hate, either manually or even automatically. And in the case of Ukraine, I would say that we also know that there is really quite a potential conglomerate of perpetrators. We know that, unfortunately, even, I would say, mainstream media in Russia are quite eager to spread the hate speech, which targets Ukrainians. But what is happening, for instance, on the Russian mainstream media is really not necessarily comparable with what is happening on the social media, and especially on the Telegram, which also has, I would argue, substantially less censorship and substantially less moderation than many other digital platforms, such as, for instance, Twitter or Facebook. And there you indeed having essentially people who are using hate speech directly to call, in some cases, even for the genocide against Ukrainians. And it's really very hard to identify those people. Like in some cases, you know, for instance, the identity of the person behind a specific channel. And in our chapter, for instance, we looked at the 3 Telegram channels where we actually know the identity of people who own those, and they vary quite broadly. There are, for instance, some former Russian combatants who were actually directly engaged in the violence. There are some Russian influencers who are behind those channels in other cases. But also we know that in many cases, hate speech is actually used by totally anonymous users who simply comment or add something to those channels, and it's extremely difficult to actually identify the identity of those people. So I would totally agree. It's really one of the biggest challenges that we are facing. And it's also not necessarily possible to find a very easy solution, because we can, for instance, really call for more, I would say, transparent registration, and, for instance, require users to provide more information about themselves when they register for the platforms. But then probably people who do want to spread hate speech simply would move to another platforms. And then there are always a lot of challenges related to the possibility of censorship, and also the enforcement of the censorship through the calls to actually fight the hate speech. So it's really extremely difficult task. And unfortunately, something that we would need to look much more in the future, I would say.
Thank you, Mykola, for your very enlightening explanation. I don't know if Özlem recovered the sound and she can hear me now. Okay, Özlem. So I was asking all of you about targets of hate speech, perpetrators of hate speech. If you had an idea who they were and if there was anything in common among them.
Okay. Unfortunately, these are among us. These are our people. These are our citizens. These are our neighbors. Even you don't expect that he may be one of the hater would be your next door. So unfortunately, thanks or for unthanks to social media, that it brings anonymity, as you know, people like turned into like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. You don't expect an ordinary man in his daily routine, he's just an ordinary man. But when the night comes and he started to surf on internet and in Twitter, then he just becomes a terrifying personality. And with the help of the anonymity, he ruins the system, he ruins people's life by creating hate messages and hatred content. And so I cannot point out individually, but I can say that they consist of our people.
Thank you, Özlem. That's a very problematic answer and a very problematic reality.
Yes.
Muluken, do you have an idea who are the perpetrators of hate speech in your context?
Yes, of course. In the case of Ethiopia, the political figures are one of the key actors in bringing the narrative of hate to the mainstream media, and that expanded to the social media by their groups and their activists. The other key actors in this issue is some diasporas living in Europe and in USA. They make it as simple business. They can have, YouTube channel easily, and they're at a distance. They don't. That business is makes some support and some oppositions. So they are one of the players in the social media hate speech. The other is
Thank you, Muluken. Thank you for your answer.
Anabela, may I also add something, because I'm totally agree with what Muluken says. I just wanted to add our neighbors, our ordinary people, or the people at the next door, since I already mentioned about the main perpetrators, including politicians, bureaucracy, and traditional media also. Thank you.
Thank you. Lida, the same question to you. Do you know who are the perpetrators in Greece who are targeting women, sometimes children, and certainly minorities and refugees?
Well, it's not very different from what my colleagues described. So it's mostly anonymous. We have a big percentage of trolling, creating a very challenging question on how we can find a balance between, protecting anonymity and enforcing the consequences for the abusive behavior that we witness in online environments. So this is something that goes back to the discussion regarding the regulation of social media and the practices that the platforms should or shouldn't adopt in order, to protect citizens from online harassment, and mostly to better identify from where this hate speech is coming. And again, I would totally agree and say that this is also, a paradox of the growth of social media, because we all agree that social media gave the opportunity to many people to be able to share their opinions online, but at the same time, they've somehow facilitated the spread of hate speech and sexist hate speech due to the anonymity they offer to the users.
Thank you, Lida. So from your interventions, I conclude that it's always worse when there is institutional coverture of hate speech, when hate speech is instrumentalized by institutions, being politics or policymakers. That is when it's most dangerous and most serious. So in order to proceed with our debate, when we still have a few minutes, I have a question from our audience from YouTube, and it's a question from Ainara Rubio. And Ainara made $1 million question you are going to answer, which is how can we fight hate speech on social media? And now I would reverse the order. I started from bottom to up, and now I'm reversing the program order and ask Lida again. Lida, how do you think we could best fight hate speech on social media?
Well, it's indeed the 1 million question. So let's all put our brains here and see what we can get as a solution or possible solutions. Well, I would say firstly to raise awareness about the problem, and also to invest on media and digital literacy. Try and educate as much as we can the audiences, starting from the younger generations, on how they can, detect hate speech online, and also to understand why hate speech is not a problem that we just witness on the online sphere, but it is a serious attack to our democracy. And then I would say that also the platforms should somehow find some more ways and tools and methodologies to become more accountable for hate speech. Okay, there are all those reports that we can do on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, but I think that we need more work to do there. For example, being more specific about why something, a content on a platform is offensive, and why. And lastly, I would say that we should also somehow support the victims of hate speech through, somehow to reverse the narratives, to spread positive messages, create campaigns that are supportive towards the people who are mostly suffering from hate speech.
Thank you very much, Lida. Maybe platforms foster hate speech by design and not by accident, and that certainly is not easy to deal with. So, Muluken, for our $1 million questions, how can we fight hate speech?
I think there should be some pressure on the social media platforms themselves. They should do something more in the technology in moderating contents. The social media should be like their name, social, not anti-social. But currently, I think they are more to anti in some areas, in some contexts than social networking than dis-networking. The other, there shall be, I think, international law that can, have some common understanding of hate speech and freedom of speech. In some country, I think hate speech considered as freedom of speech. So it's so difficult to have some attackers to bring them in front of law. So unless there is an international consensus, as the technology is international, local and national laws cannot only help to prevent such kinds of widespread problems. The other is, I think, media literacy shall be part of children's curriculum. Particularly in my country case, there is high media illiteracy. So even the internet penetration is low, but the hate speech promotion online is very rampant. So there should be some literacy awareness creation and campaign. And I think if God helps us, our politica.
Thank you, Muluken. We are getting very close to the end of our session. Mykola, in 2 minutes, can you tell us how can we fight hate speech?
I would leave also 1 minute for Özlem. So I would say that in my understanding, there are really excellent points that were already made by the previous speaker. I would say that probably looking at the reasons why people actually do engage in the hate speech and actually understanding different rationales would be really very important, because as we already saw during this great panel, there are really many differences on the different national contexts and also many rationales why people actually engage into spread and the production of the hate speech. And I would say that without understanding those rationales better, we would not really necessarily be able either to cull the spread of the hate speech technologically or even regulate it. So I would say it's my stance on the subject, and I am shifting to Özlem.
Thank you, Mykola. Özlem, 2 minutes too, please.
Okay, I have some approaches that can be considered when addressing hate speech online. One approach is, I call it collaborative efforts. Governments, internet platforms, civil society organizations, and users should collaborate to combat hate speech effectively. Education and awareness is also another approach, because we have to promote digital literacy and educating users about the consequences of hate speech. And fostering online civility are crucial. On the other hand, I think reporting mechanisms and then content moderation and establishing community guidelines for online platforms is another important part of fighting against hate online. And of course, legislation and legal enforcement. So each government can enact and enforce laws specifically targeting hate speech online. Thank you. That was it.
Thank you, Özlem. Thank you very much. So we're it's 7 o'clock, so we will have to close this session. I want to thank you, all of you, 4 of you, for your brilliant presentations in this panel and for sharing your national contexts on hate speech. I learned a lot. I know our audience learned a lot too, and I'm going to read your chapters with a lot more interest, having met you. We really don't have time. Branco is getting nervous, so I'm passing the word to Branco. Branco, you can close the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Anabela Gradim, for posing such thought questions, provoking questions for us. I also learned a lot in this panel. And thanks also to all the members of the first panel. All presentations were very interesting, and it's an honor to work with you. Now, let's take a 5 minutes break to organize the second panel, but stay with us and see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, guys, so I want, we're not on YouTube now. It's just private talk. I really wanted to thank you for your excellent presentations, and it was a shame we couldn't discuss a bit more, but the fact that this was such an international panel, truly international, every one of your presentations was very different from the Portuguese reality and from the Brazilian reality, and that is true knowledge production, being on a panel and being on a conference in which you can learn. So thank you very much to all of you. Branco, uma pergunta.
Sim,
Eu posso assistir a partir do YouTube?
Pode, do YouTube ou daqui, se você quiser, tanto faz. Pode ser do YouTube. Quer o link?
Não, eu acho que eu tenho um link no seu mail.
Ok.
Pronto, então eu vou passar para o YouTube.
Anabela, muito
Para não estar
obrigado.
aqui a atrapalhar na sala.
Muito obrigado pela moderação.
Foi de facto um painel excelente. E muito
Nós temos uma audiência ali, temos 34, 35, às vezes 40 pessoas, está interessante.
Agora vai passar a 36, porque eu vou mudar para o YouTube, que eu não estou. Tá?
Vamos
Branco,
a isso.
boa sorte, então.
Obrigado, Anabela.
Painel. Até já.
Até já. Marta.
Sim, Branco?
Correu bem, né? Foi tudo tranquilo.
Sim, Branco, ainda estamos a transmitir o áudio no YouTube.
Ah, ok.
Sim, eu pus no chat, não é possível desativar, mas nós estamos a transmitir imagem. Portanto, as pessoas podem acompanhar durante o intervalo. Não é possível interromper totalmente o áudio, pelo menos pensar.
Ok. Então, deixa. Até já. Hello again. This is the International Seminar Hate Speech on Social Media. I would like to invite Professor Jorge Cruz at the Pontifical Catholic University in Ecuador, who will moderate the next panel. Thanks, Professor Jorge, for accepting our invitations. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Fátima. Thank you to all the participants, to all our scholars that contribute to the publication of this book. First of all, I want to congratulate LabCom. We at PUSE in Ecuador, we were quite glad to have the opportunity to publish the work that all the scholars had and organized through the work of Branco and all the people from LabCom. It's an honor for us, this little country in South America, to have all your contributions. We will be talking about this publication for years, for ages, and I think that's a good thing because that's the way that we can improve research. We can improve also the amount of impact that we can have regarding all our efforts to study and to promote, to combat hate speech. I would like to start by presenting our speakers. I will present the three of them in the order of the participations, and then I will give each speaker 15 minutes to present their ideas, and then we can start our discussion. I will encourage the people that are watching the seminar to publish their questions or their comments on YouTube, on the post that is on YouTube. Well, first of all, I'd like to present Professor Munoriyarwa from the University of Botswana. He's a senior lecturer in the Department of Media Studies at the University of Botswana. His research is quite interested in researching in journalism, news production practices, platforms, and social media. He has also researched widely on data journalism, big data, and digital surveillance. His research employs different qualitative and quantitative methodologies. Welcome, Professor Munoriyarwa. Then I would like to present Professor Aondover Msughter from the University of Calais in Nigeria. He's part of the Department of Mass Communication in the University of Calais in Lagos, Nigeria, with specialization in journalism and media studies. He has published several international and national articles in journals and attended and participated in several conferences and workshops on communication, media, and journalism. He's a member of the association.
Sorry, sir. I'm not a professor, sir. I want to correct that. I'm not a professor.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Eric. It's fine. He's a member of the Association of Communication Scholars and Professionals of Nigeria, African Council of Communication Education, and Fellow of Social Science Research Council. Welcome, Eric. Thank you for the clarification. That's fine. And finally, I would like to present Professor Gencel from the Universität of Siegen. She's a researcher and co-principal investigator for the DFG-funded research group, Transformation and Despopularen. I hope my German is not as bad as I think. At the University of Siegen, at the project titled Fabricating the People, Negotiating Claims of Representation in Social Media in Podgetsy, Turkey. She also teaches in both graduate and postgraduate programs of Media Studies Department at the University of Siegen. Welcome, Professor Beck. Well, we'll start with Professor Munoriyarwa. Please, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Professor Cruz. I am Dr. Munoriyarwa, and I would like to, first of all, thank the editors of the book for the massive amount of effort that was put in this project. And also, I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate them. My contribution in this book was basically a Southern African perspective on social media and hate speech. So what I tried to do here was to try and consummate a regional perspective of how hate speech practices are morphing up in the Southern African region. In order to do this, I basically tried to look at quite a number of countries, several countries, that I tried to pull together to understand how they regulate hate speech and what are the manifesting practices of hate speech in these countries. So you see my chapter is chapter 8, and I focused on countries that include South Africa, Zimbabwe, Swaziland, Botswana, and I think Zambia. What I also was trying to do was, I thought a regional approach was going to help me for several reasons. The first one being that research on hate speech in the region of Southern Africa is still emerging. So there is, of course, that gap that has not yet been filled, that tries to look at how hate speech itself has been regulated in the region. Then secondly, while research is still emerging, is still in its infant stages, you will notice actually that in the Southern African region, instances of hate speech are growing and basically fueled by social media and other factors that I will just discuss very soon. So the first question that I actually problematized in this chapter was, how does hate speech look like in the region? And I basically made 3 very important points in the chapter. What I noticed is that when we look at the manifestations of hate speech in Southern Africa, it has taken 3 broad dimensions. Firstly, it is very much identity-based. That's what I discovered. Then secondly, you will notice that hate speech is also very much based on sexual orientation. And then lastly, it is also a political thing. It is a political development. So maybe let me start to try and flesh out what these 3 means. But maybe before I do that, I would want to maybe give a scope of this region. So when we look at the region that we call Southern Africa, there are important aspects that have come to color the manifestations of hate speech in the region. The first one is that the region shares a characteristic of deep oppression brought by colonialism. And then if you take the case of South Africa, it is the brutality of apartheid that actually stands to color most of the post-apartheid country that we talk about is South Africa. So you see a shared similarity being the history of colonialism, then contemporary forms of massive inequalities also tend to do color the practices that I'm going to talk about. So you will notice that identity-based hate speech is one of the most common practices in the region, one that is based on color, the black-white dichotomies. That is one that is actually contributing much to what we see on social media. The narratives, the discourses of hate speech that we tend to see on social media, they are driven by issues around color. So if you go to South Africa, for example, most of the cases on hate speech that have been prosecuted in the country have to do with the black versus the white. So those of you who would want to explore this further, there are 2 very prominent or notorious, let me call them notorious instances of color-based hate speech. The one is called the Vicky Momendeg case. The other one is the Payne Sparrow hate speech case. All these are very much racially based. I just gave you 2 examples, but there are many that you come to notice as defining what we call hate speech on social media in post-apartheid South Africa. So you also notice that these cases of hate, of color-based, identity-based hate speech have militated against the overall, the broader vision of the country we call South Africa. South Africa, when it got its independence from apartheid, when it was liberated from apartheid in 1994, its overall intention was the creation of a rainbow nation. And this rainbow nation was one that is characterized by racial harmony. But these ideals are now defeated by social media fueled hate speech, most of which has been contributed to by issues around color. You will also notice this trend in Zimbabwe, and it was very much manifest during the reign of Robert Mugabe and during the land reform. You will notice that hate speech was driven by the black-white dichotomy. But maybe what I consider as the lucky side of Zimbabwe was that there was no social media during this time to really drive serious and detrimental effects of hate speech discourses. But that doesn't mean that hate speech has not continued in the era of social media. It has continued, and it is still has shown the same characteristics of being race-driven. Then you can also go to these two types of hate speech. The one identity-based, based on color, and the one that I just have described in Zimbabwe. You'll notice that they are not only fueled by social media, there are other underlying factors that tend to drive them. And one of them is how the wealthy and the comforts of these countries are distributed. So you will notice that in South Africa, for example, because of the massive inequalities, especially the unimproved black person's condition after the end of apartheid, people are beginning to question issues around how wealthy is distributed and how wealthy is shared in the country. And these discourses of how the general comforts and the wealth the country is generating are shared are actually driving hate speech. And then you can add to the mix the question of social media, the prevalence of social media. You can then see how toxic and polarized the environment is. Then I also would want to talk about the other manifestation of hate speech in the region is hate speech that is based on sexual orientation. So you'll notice that there is also a prevalence of hate speech that targets the LGBTQI+1 community. And this has been very prevalent even on social media. And part of the reason is that in the majority of the countries of Southern Africa, same-sex marriages, the LGBTQI communities are illegal. And you see this as basically driving much of social media-driven hate speech on this community. South Africa legalizes same-sex marriages, but that has also not stopped the vitriol and hate speech against this community. So the fact of the illegality that the same-sex marriages are basically mostly illegal in most of these countries is actually contributing to social media hate speech against this community. But even where it is illegal, as I said, in South Africa, you will notice that it is because of two other driving factors on social media. One, cultural myth. The cultural myth in the region that same-sex marriage is against Black people's culture is one of those factors that also drives hate speech against the LGBTQI community. Then disinformation is also part of those factors that are driving hate speech in the region against the LGBTQI people. But there are also regional peculiarities that I want to talk about. Let me talk about elite-driven social media hate speech. So you find that in some context, the political elites are very much responsible for driving hate speech on social media. And these are contexts that you find polarized the political context like Zimbabwe. they laxity in terms of illegalizing hate speech on social media. So there are basically no consequences in some other context. You will emulate the effort that South Africa has put in this regard. South Africa has a robust, a clear hate speech law, especially one on social media. And I think the reason is that it is because of its apartheid history that it has been able to come up with such a strong legislation. Yet the incidences and the prevalence of hate speech has generally increased in the region. So it actually speaks to the issues around lax regulation of hate speech, and of course, the nature of social media itself. That social media basically allows that this kind of speech can continue without much gatekeeping. The consequences are only felt after the speech. So these are some of the issues that drive hate speech. Maybe the last point that I would want to talk about is the legislation itself. I wanted to highlight the fact that there are legislation against hate speech in the region, and I'm giving this point in reflection, concluding reflections. Legislation against hate speech in this region is a double-barreled gun, if I can put it that way. Why? Because one, it can help to reduce instances of hate speech, but the region has increasingly witnessed the hardening authoritarianism. The danger is that this legislation can extend beyond the normative intentions of policing hate speech. It can actually be used as a reactionary policy against political opponents, especially in the context where semi-authoritarianism is hardening. But at the same time, we can also not take away the positives that strict and robust legislation can bring. But it still remains out there to look at, do we really need to prosecute and hate speech, especially in a region without much cogent and positive history of this kind of prosecution. Thank you very much. I think I would end here.
Thank you, Dr. Munoriyarwa. That's a very interesting presentation. Actually, I had the chance to review your chapters, and I would like to highlight a couple of ideas before I pass to the next speaker. There are some questions regarding free speech, consequences, and all these dichotomies that you presented are quite keen to develop the study of hate speech in the southern region of Africa. Later on, I would like to talk to you about this narrative of power, because this narrative of people in power or seeking power can affect the way that some regulations can affect the way that people approach to this kind of speech, or the consequences that they can sense that social media can prevent or can boost. Thank you again, Doctor, for your presentation. Now, I would like to invite our next speaker, Hanover Eric Msughter, from Lagos, Nigeria, from the university, the Caleb University, to his presentation. Please, the floor is yours. Welcome again.
Thank you very much. Let me first of all appreciate the editor of the book and the LabCom for putting this initiative on board. I'm Aondover Eric from Caleb University, Lagos, Nigeria. And I sincerely thank the organizer for finding me worthy to share my thoughts on the subject matter. And I hope I will measure up to your generous expectations. Actually, my chapter is chapter 10, titled Social Media, Reflection on Hate Speech, in Nigerian context. And what I did in the chapter is to look at the issue of hate speech, the concept of hate speech, the indicators that are used to identify what constitutes hate speech on social media, the manifestation of hate speech, as well as the legal framework on the position of hate speech. So in Nigeria, hate speech represents a form of threat to damage the lives of people, as well as the entire society. Hate speech is a social problem that, if not monitored, could lead to greater consequences, including war, public disorder, and can also affect the stability and peaceful coexistence of the nation. And the latest trend in journalism practice in the country today is the dissemination of hate speech. And the media also fell into the trap of reporting hate speech by quoting directly from interviews and advertorial, and sometimes from alleged online sources. So all these things constitute a big challenge as the watchdog of the society, as the fourth estate of the realm and not the wreck, as Professor Akinfele will always say. The media are expected to provide a platform for narratives that are hate speech free. But over the years, we have been seeing the manifestation of hate speech on social media. Now, what is hate speech? Hate speech is any expression or any writing that expresses prejudice against a particular goal, especially based on race, religion, or sexual orientation. So any abusive or threatening speech or any writing that expresses this prejudice can be considered as hate speech. What are the indicators that are used to identify what constitutes hate speech on social media within the context of Nigeria? Number one, we have offensive speech. And these are comments that attack personalities. Number two, we have hateful speech. And these are also comments that are insultive of ethnic, religious, or regional groups. We also have inciting statements. And these are comments that cause for attacks of a particular group of people. Now we also have pungent. And these are comments that are targeted to a person in form of criticism. And lastly, we have sarcasm. And these are utterances that are calculated to, expose people to danger. Now, aside this, in Nigeria, the manifestation of hate speech can also be attributed to misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, and dangerous hate speech. Now, what is misinformation? Misinformation is any provision of fake information with no clear intent to cause harm. Many of these take place in Nigeria, where the distributors of such information have no intention to cause harm, but to contribute in spreading the right information without cross-checking the authenticity of such information. Then number two, disinformation. And disinformation is the spread of false information with a clear intent to cause harm. There are many instances that some people intentionally distort information, particularly with the help of new technology of media, to distort the truth, to cause harm to consumers and producers of such content. And this is evident within the context of Nigeria at different levels of security, politics, and even economics. Now, malinformation. Malinformation is when the information is genuine, but has not been used for what it was meant for originally. And this is becoming the order of the day in Nigeria and is leading to invasion of privacy and scandals. Many stars and celebrities have been affected of this. And the society seems to be okay with this. Look at the case of a popular Nigerian singer, Tiwa Savage, whose sexual, interaction video, find its way into social media. So these are big issues. And lastly, we have dangerous hate speech. And these are speeches that are calculated to destroy somebody's reputation or image, or to create a kind of psychological disposition on family members. We all saw what played out in the 2015 general election in Nigeria, where there were a lot of hate speeches that, given the hate condition of President Buhari, he might die in the office should he, win the election. And some people went as far as citing examples of Murtala Mohammed, Sani Abacha, and Umara Musa Yar'Adua, who all are from the north west of Nigeria, die in office. And if Buhari is given the chance, he will also die in the office. And these are dangerous hate speech. And the society needs to be aware of this. So the big question is hate speech freedom of expression? Now look at the legal framework. In Nigeria, look at the Constitution. The Nigerian Constitution, Section 39, subsection 1 of the Constitution guarantee freedom of expression. But if you look at subsection 3, also place a limitation to that freedom of expression by stating that nothing in this section shall invalidate any law that is reasonably justifiable in a democratic society. A, for the purpose of what? Public defense, public safety, public morality, and public health. B, for the purpose of protecting the interest and the right and freedom of other persons. And then if you also look at Section 95 and Section 96 of the Electoral Act 2010 in Nigeria, also disapprove the use of language that will hurt tribal, religion, or sectional feelings. If you also look at paragraph 10C of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, also disapprove the use of hate speech. If you also look at the law of libel and slander, again, protects the citizen against hateful utterances. Despite all this legal framework, there is a kind of manifestation of hate speech on social media, which are indication as a result of deviance in the manifestation of mental laziness in understanding the laws or the ineffectiveness of such laws. Because if these laws are effective, people should be able to face the consequence of their action, which will serve as a deterrent to others. But because these laws are not even effective at times, and it is not only the issue of hate speech, it's not only peculiar in Nigeria alone. If you also look at Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, also provide and protect the right to freedom of expression. If you also look at Article 10(2) of the European Convention on Human Rights, also disapprove or limit the access to freedom of expression. Now, if you look at the law that was passed in South Africa on the 29th March 2018, Section 1A of the bill also disapproved the use of hate speech. And despite all these things, the issue of hate speech keep, becoming more and more on social media. And the reason is simple. Some of these laws are not effective. In Nigeria recently, they passed a bill that will regulate social media. And the question is, do we even need to regulate the social media if these laws are effective? And another question is, who should we trust with the responsibility of regulating the social media without taking away the fundamental, freedom of information and speech, which was fought and won over a long period in many countries? As these are some of the issues. And within the context of Nigeria, hate speech is not a new thing. One of the problems of election in Nigeria has been the issue of hate speech. If you look at the just concluded election in Nigeria, you can see a clear manifestation of hate speeches. So these are issues. And because the laws are not effective enough to address some of these, issues. And Nigeria has been facing this problem as a result of hate speech and even the way the media also handle some of these issues. For example, in Nigeria, from 1950s up to early 1980s and down to the Fourth Republic that started in 1999 and beyond, most of the issues were associated with hate speech and the way media handle some of these issues. The 1965 parliamentary and also the 1983 general election also faced similar issue, which resulted to military intervention. So these are big issues in Nigeria, which I try to, conceptualize within the context of the, chapter. And again, Nigeria is practicing democracy, but is not willing to imbibe the tenets that comes with democracy. And tolerance and hate speech are some of these issues. And if you can see today, the prediction of Makhortykh in 1964 of the world becoming a global village is here with us today. And his is exactly what is happening today on social media. So we need to address some of these issues because for democracies to succeed in any given country, at least issues of hate speech must be given, absolute consideration. So I was given 8 to 10 minutes. So I may not want to exceed the time. So I thank you so much for listening. And I sincerely thank the organizers once again for finding me worthy to share my thoughts on the subject hate speech on social media. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our speaker, Msughter. Of course, it's a privilege, I can assure you, for LabCom and ODECOM in Ecuador, for us to have the opportunity to know all your work from all over the world. I will just highlight a couple of things again from your presentation. First, how important it is to identify the typologies on hate speech. You said that it's not a new phenomenon. All over the world is a known phenomenon. Then we are always try to understand how these hate speeches reaching new spaces, new mediums. Second, I think this difference or this dichotomy between freedom of speech and regulation is a common, not just a common thread, but it's something that countries should address more vividly. Third, I think the pragmatics of language is quite important, because it doesn't matter how the regulation, how society can put a law. You said an effective law should stop hate speech if it is effective, and we are not supposed to regulate social media, but actually we are dealing with the pragmatics of language. That means that we kind of accept that people are difficult and very hidden intentions, and that's one of the more difficult things that we have to face. Thanks again to our second presentation. Finally, I would like to welcome again to Dr. Mine Gelkenbeck from the Universität Siegen. Willkommen.
Thank you. I myself don't know German very much, so I work in Siegen now in the project of transformation of popular with a special reference to populism and social media. But I'm originally from Turkey, and maybe it's not hate speech, but as a result of criminalization of freedom of expression of critical academics, I found myself in Germany suddenly in 2017. It was not a planned trip, so I think it is related to our topic as well, how I found myself in Germany. Anyhow, and yesterday there was a general election in Turkey, and still it is also related to our topic because we have seen a series of hate speech being used actively by the political actors before the elections, and still it continues. There are hundreds and thousands of examples, unfortunately. It's not related to, I have to say thank you to Branco, to Fátima for editing and collecting us, bringing us here together, and to you, Jorge, for moderating, of course, because this issue, I think, is not, none of these academic subjects, as critical scholars, we concentrate, none of them are pure, only academic topics, but also these are political, I think, engagements, and a topic of activism as well. I would consider myself also an activist, not only a researcher. So therefore, it is very, very valuable that it's our aim is not to publish, even though it looks really nice, to publish at the end and online, openly accessible, freely accessible. It's very democratic, and it's really nice to see the outcome. But also this process of us, trying to get to know each other and trying to see similarities, differences, and whether there are any trends. In overall, these are, I think, valuable intellectual, questions and attempts. So it's not limited with the social media. There are political actors dimension, they are connected. But in this book also, of course, our focus was on social media. It's not limited with Turkey, and you already provide many examples. There are cases from the US, there are cases even from the EU countries, and it is very alarming. It's on the rise, actually. And I would say it is on the rise in parallel with the increasing right-wing populist discourses, parties and discourses. And it takes different forms. Sometimes we see it's being addressed indirectly, not directly. And I would think that we have to be really alarmed and, position ourselves and struggle against that. This is what happened in Turkish case, actually. Because I would say that the beginning of hate speech discussions, and at least in terms of academic studies, it began after the assassination of Hrant Dink from Armenian Turkish newspaper, Agos newspaper editor-in-chief and journalist in 2007. And since then, I know we are not many, but I mean, after seeing the election results yesterday and today, but there are some sensitivity among the circles of academic researchers, activists, and so on. That is that if it starts, if any group, any person is started to be targeted, it continues. And the point here is not to leave anyone alone. And we have this nice expression, hashtag, yalnız değilsin, means that you are not alone. Whatever happens, we use this hashtag. And unfortunately, we use this hashtag so often because there are always some people being targeted. So in a way, I guess I want to say that social media also has a potential, has a progressive potential to be used, and we are using it, definitely. The point of the importance of hate speech is hate speech doesn't remain only as speech. It also leads to actions, unfortunately, hate crimes. As we saw in the case of Hrant Dink, assassination of people, murder of people. His murder, by the way, was not being solved yet since 2007. But what happened was that there was a foundation being established called Hrant Dink Foundation. So they really initiated lots of research projects, monitoring activities of print media. That time, I have to underline the fact that the main focus was not social media, but the print media, because print media, the news was showing him as a target. But of course, they developed their perspective, and they are now including social media, even artificial intelligence, and so on. So if you ask me who are the subjects, who are the topics in Turkey, yes, the issue was really started and increased with this issue of Armenian identity. So as my colleagues before me already explained, there is this identity dimension, definitely. And in Turkish case, non-Turkish and non-Muslim identities, because the main dominant identity is Turkish and Sunni Muslim. So the others who are not Sunni, Alevite identity, non-Turkish, non-Muslim, Armenians, Kurdish, Alevite, and as well as sexual preferences or LGBTQ people are being targeted. They are, and it is increasing a lot, unfortunately, again, in parallel with the rising anti-gender ideology in the world. Even during the election campaigns by the president Recep Tayyip Erdogan, LGBT people was shown as almost like an enemy, you know, and they are not allowed, they are not accepted in the Turkish families codes. And people were reacting in the, you know, real meetings, offline meetings, you know, it's beyond online. So they are really together one by one. My colleague already, Eric, mentioned about sarcasm, and yes, not only through anger by populist, you know, right-wing leaders. We see lots of anger, but there is also sarcasm, especially sarcasm. My colleagues pointed out the use of sarcasm in the representation of refugees. The general name in Turkish media, this nationalist media, is Syrians. Like Syrians is a general umbrella term, but it's really, there's a big hate speech against them at the moment. Even during the COVID-19 crisis, there is a very nice report I also quoted in my book. Chinese people are being targeted, elderly people after 65 years old, you know, older than 65. Again, LGBT always comes to the point in Turkish case recently. So it is very, very alarming because they are shown as the target. So it, unfortunately, yes, it continues. But yes, there are many initiatives, there are many studies working to change this representation. But it's not only limited with the social media representation, and it is connected with the powerful, active political actors. Therefore, I'm not really very optimistic in the short run. So there are many things to be done, even beyond social media. And in the paper also, I pointed out studies that do not only monitor how hate speech is being constructed, and they don't only show this, but there are also studies how to change this, how to construct a different language and discourse. And these are open access, by the way, in Turkish and English in the Hrant Dink Foundation website, if you check regarding the representation of refugees. There is a very nice manual, as well as another manual with Article 19, again, similar work. Also different ways of using social media and applications for progressive purposes, you know, countering hate speech. For example, Kardeş app, again, developed by Hrant Dink. It shows how to see the different perspectives of the city we live in from a more multicultural perspective. What kind of communities live there? What are the different experiences? So that's a very nice work also. And sometimes non-media activities, not social media and non-media activities, like food campaigns, food festivals, for example, dumpling festivals, organized, and there was a newsletter as well to let people that there are so many common we share, and one of them is food culture, and how can this food culture, having festival, you know, organizing, coming together in the form of festivals can also break these barriers, you know, these dichotomies, these polarizations. I know I quoted very often the name of Hrant Dink Foundation. I think it is because they are really carrying out lots of activities, but they are not the only one. So there are some alternative organizations, news media organizations like Bianet, Independent Media Network, for example. They also very often, regularly, they publish the map of domestic violence, women being subjected to violence, very often with diagrams and maps, you know, how many women are being killed in this month and by whom and what is the reason and so on. Again, LGBT organizations, they also produce good work like Kaos GL, Lambda and other organizations. So at least there are some things going on, you know, like thanks to these organizations and thanks to many academic research that I quoted in my chapter. At least we are underlining, you know, we are sharing with the public what's happening. But does it change the mainstream discourse? To what extent it contributes to change? It is really hard to be optimistic. And regarding maybe my colleagues started a very good discussion and how can social media be regulated, you know, like it's a very also difficult question. Maybe it is one of our group's second agenda. Maybe we can continue to think about it later. In Turkish case, it is very dangerous because we have seen recently regulation of disinformation. I put in bracket because anything can be, you know, censored or banned or taken into court. Even now, my words can be, you know, taken to the court with this law. Anything, you know, like anything which is against family, you know, national unity, insulting president, you know, this very, very general statements. What is disinformation? Whatever it's not allowed, it can be called as disinformation. So what I'm, I guess, trying to say is that regulating of this social platforms for the interest of public, for the diversity of citizens, of course, it is something I would go for it, I would advocate. But we shouldn't forget that these authoritarian regimes also use this as an excuse, you know, to bring more and more restrictions. Then I stop here. Maybe I use also, like my colleague said, I use the case of a celebrity, Sezen Aksu's case, who is a very, very popular singer. I use this case and the use of hate tweets. And her reactions also, it is nice because then you could see the resistance as well. And through this case, I could show actually to the readers how all these identities and all these issues can be combined together, including womanhood, including LGBT, including being Kurdish, Armenian, non-Christian, and almost any other critical political activity actually can be the subject of hate speech in Turkey at the moment. So it is a very, very dangerous, I think, transformation we live through. So yes, maybe after, if you read that case study, and if you have any question, I'm happy to reply. Thank you very much.
Great, Mine. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation, and all our presenters to stick to the time. It was very good. It was kind of you. Two things I want to talk about this presentation very quickly. First of all, the work that we have done, you said it good, properly, should project just beyond the academic spheres. We should face that universities and foundations should work together and should work for these same objectives. It's not just the work of foundations or the work of universities researching, but to approach activism, because hate speech need to be addressed not only by researching, but to take into action some problematizations on this manner, and this we can talk to the audiences and societies regarding how we can address hate speech. And on the other hand, how these new narratives or alternative narratives can help this combat to hate speech. You talk about these food festivals. While I was reading your chapter, I encountered this song from Sezen Aksu, right? And music and any kind of artistic narratives can also be a way to promote the fight, the good fight against hate speech. Thank you very much. I will like to use this opportunity to present a couple of questions to our presenters. Olyinka San, yes, from YouTube, she said that, well, she congratulated Eric for the presentation, and I think is a question for Eric directly. I wonder to what extent is hate speech rooted in the everyday practices, which is fraught with rivalry? Also, to what extent is harmed speech a tool deployed by the powerful to the fulfillment to their own ends? She's talking about the 2023 elections to come in mind. The questions is talking about specifically if this hate speech is rooted in everyday practices, and if it is a tool from the people in power to fulfill their ends. Eric, please.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, I was citing the case of, the specifically 2023 general election. If you look at with the advent of social media, because there is not much regulation as regards to social media. So if you see, especially the 2023 general election within Nigerian context, in fact, social media was used as a tool. In fact, it becomes a harvest, a platform for a harvest of hate speeches. If you look at the president-elect, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, after the election, immediately he traveled out of the country, and you could see some of the manifestation of dangerous hate speech on social media. So today, people have deployed social media to become a tool for dissemination of hate speeches on social media. And again, the media is also responsible in this act because most of the times they quote directly from interviews, press statement, advertorial, and also alleged online sources, which also they are helping as the media are supposed to checkmate some of this so that they can be able to, monitor this. But because of the advent of social media, it's becoming a tool for people to use it to, propagate hate speech on social media. So to a large extent, social media is becoming a tool for people to use and propagate, hate speeches on social media. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Well, this tool is available from both sides.
Sure.
And it should be. Please go ahead, Eric.
Yes, and that was why we raised the question of regulating social media. Of course, it's not only from the citizen, even the politicians. And that is why it becomes difficult to regulate the social media because the question is, should we even trust the responsibilities of those that will regulate social media? To whose end?
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
That's right. And I think that's the next question. I would like to ask Professor and Dr. Munoriyarwa to address this. This is Sylvester Ojegnebon. Sorry if I'm not reading it correctly. Alan, please, the question says, who should we trust with the responsibility of regulating social media? That's the million-dollar question, Sylvester says.
Thank you. I think before we even ask about trusting, who we should trust, maybe the broader conversation should also include the question of whether we really need this social media regulation, and then how would the regulation look like? Then once those things are settled, then maybe the other aspect is how, at what level do we say we have sufficient regulation considering the changes that take place in social media platforms every day? But then when we ask the question of who then should we trust, it is a very difficult one to answer, because in some other context, we might want to do it via independent institutions, because social media is a very sensitive space and it is hard to trust our political elites to lead in this process. And also it might also be very difficult to trust institutions, law enforcement institutions, in contexts where they might be very partisan. But still, even with the institutions, the changes that happen on social media platforms every day make it hard for us to really say, in my view, to really say we have sufficient regulation. We might have a regulation today, but 2 weeks down the line, the regulation is no longer enough to address the issues that were happening 2 weeks ago. So it is very difficult to come out with that one. And then the emotive nature of social media, and when we talk about social hate speech, we are talking about something that is very emotive, because it reaches deep into society, our ways of quotidian practices. So it is also now very difficult to say who exactly should be trusted with this one. It's a question whose jury is out there, because you will never come to a conclusion to say this is the group or these are the people that we can trust with regulating social media. And that discussion will be endless.
Yeah, we'll be talking about it for ages, and it won't be easy. Yeah, you could say that you can ask people from the third sector, not a non-governmental organization can face that challenge, but again, you should have citizens within the decisions and politicians within the decision. I mean, it's a matter that we can involve every aspect of the society, and that's difficult as well. Well, thank you for your response. It's actually a very difficult response, but you guide us well. This question is for Mine, and you talk about this in your paper, and this is the same topic, I guess. These counter organizations that are developing studies and developing activities. What do you think that it's the same thing? It would be the same thing to combat hate speech within social media, within internet, within these internet spheres. It's different to combat, to fight hate speech in the streets. It's the same thing. It's very different. How these organizations are behaving, how they are producing these counterattacks to hate speech.
Yeah, the one I mentioned, they are not from the industry or from the big commercial media companies or something. They are more working either voluntary basis or through the fundings of European Union, different international projects. So none of them is, I think, operating in a commercial media industry as a mainstream player. So so far, those struggling against hate speech are Ramting Foundation, independent media network, or LGBTQ associations, and some also human rights associations. I forgot, actually. They don't maybe actively work on the basis of social media as much as the others worked, but there are also human rights organizations and foundations in Turkey. And soon, I think these days, they have to work proactively against the use of technology in a more creative ways, and in advocating hate speech. The technology of artificial intelligence, the use of deepfake. It's different from fake news. We know this more, but there's deepfake dimension as well. And sometimes it sounds innocent because it is being used by some associations in a satirical, political way, in a more innocent way. But again, I think it is a very, very serious threat, in disseminating hate speech, I would say. So we have to be very careful. And very often it is being used to actually for anti-gender ideology again, to manipulate, to victimize women, LGBT people, and so on. And it really disturbs me, that the everyday use in mainstream media and on social media, it is portrayed as innocent, satirical, funny videos, like a head of politician woman is connected to a pornographic star's body, in a naked way, and then the next day they declare and they say, oh, it's not the body of this woman minister. So it's really, really pity that again, women and LGBT people are being exploited in this technology very much. And I don't see yet very powerful reactions, from even these organizations I mentioned. I think they are trying to catch what's happening. They are trying to understand what's happening at the moment. And it is also a future subject for us, And active, as activists, we have to be really, really act faster because they are doing it fast. There's no other way.
Of course.
So I would conclude anyway. Sorry that I extended too long, but I would say that I wish, rather than being reactive, we could be more proactive in that sense. We could develop the strategies, what to do, without being panicked, and how can we challenge these deepfake videos against sexism or racism or homophobia. all these dangerous discourses to promote violent actions and so on. So still, I don't see strong evidence to combat with that yet.
Thank you. It is quite important that I will stay with the word activism, because well, all of us, we are media or journalism professors, and to be a professor actually is a kind of activism, because you are every day trying to promote some good I'll say some behavior and some good practices among students. And these media students, these journalism students, should be the ones that can disseminate these good practices in their TV stations, newspapers, digital enterprises. And being a media and a journalism professor, it's a way to promote this kind of good work. I will say that I think this kind of book, this kind of research, this kind of panel, and this kind of the whole activity that the LabCom is organizing is a way to improve the way that we can guide and be guided to fight hate speech. I would like to thank you all. I would like to say again that we had the pleasure to have Dr. Alain Munoriyarwa from the University of Botswana, Anabela Msughter from the Caleb University of Nigeria, and Gencel from the University of Siegen in Germany. I'm very humble and very proud of being part of this. I congratulate again LabCom, Branco, Fátima, of course, the editor of the publication. From Ecuador, I would like to send you all the best to all of you. And I encourage our viewers to check on the book, the chapters, all of them. Well, the discusses and discovers quite important issues on hate speech. Dear Branco.
Thanks, Professor Jorge Cruz, for posing such thought-provoking questions today. Thanks also to all the members of the second panel. I'm really proud of our work today and with the book. Hate speech is a complex issue that manifests itself in different social contexts for many decades. However, with the fast development of digital technologies, understanding hate speech has become even more challenging. Because of this, we published this book that explores the nature of hate speech. Our book is open access, and the link is available in the description of this broadcast. You can download and share it for free. LabCom and other research centers will promote next Monday, at the same time as today, the second part of this international seminar with the Ibero-American speakers. You can find more information on LabCom's website. Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks to our partners in the organization of this event, and see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Cheers.